Hello everyone, I'm Dan Fisher. I'm a writer and senior editor at Conatus News.
Hello, my name is Sara Iraqiya, and I'm also a writer and contributor for Conatus News.
Welcome to our podcast, the first episode of our Conatus News podcast. We're going to be talking about the news and issues of the week and articles that we've published from a variety of perspectives. We're going to have different people on each week, sometimes writers, sometimes other people we're interested in, we want to hear from. So today, we've got a few topics to talk about. In the news this week, there's been some developments from Russia, for example. We've had poisoning in the UK. Putin has successfully won another election, if you can call it that. We've had the continued siege of Afrin in Syria by the Turkish state against Kurdish forces. And in China, Xi Jinping has won himself another term, abolishing term limits. So we're seeing an increasing rise of authoritarianism across the world. And this concerns me because I think this is actually continuing fallout from the collapse of the Soviet Union, what was described as the end of history. I think, and I'm sure this has been discussed a lot of times before, but I think what we can describe as the neoliberal establishment, and I'm not using that term as a pejorative, but I think the neoliberal establishment felt like it didn't have any real opponents anymore. China, although they still had the Communist Party in power, they were opening up their economy. We had the downfall of the Soviet Union, obviously, but there was a rollback in the rest of the Soviet bloc. And I think people believed that the neoliberal consensus was here to stay, that nothing was going to arise and challenge that. And I think what we've seen is a sort of a stealthy rise in authoritarianism. I think authoritarian leaders took advantage of this sort of arrogance, if I may describe it that way. I think in Russia, for example, because the thing is, we have Vladimir Putin, who's a former KGB member, but there isn't anything really shady from his past as a KGB member.
That we know of.
Seems like, that we know of. Seems like a fairly low-key post. But what we do know is that as soon as he entered politics, he was corrupt from the get-go. There were scandals. It was suggested he be removed. This is very early on, sort of 1991. I don't remember the exact date. But from the very beginning, he was involved in some dodgy stuff. And he rose to power during Boris Yeltsin's time in charge of Russia. So if Vladimir Putin was corrupt, then it's fair to say that Boris Yeltsin was in some way. So the fall of the Soviet Union, I think, could have been handled a lot better.
Oh yes, of course, a lot better. And we're still seeing a lot of the kind of blowback today. We're seeing. I remember when I first started in international relations, and getting really passionate about it, and researching Central Asia. Because at the time, it was in 2010, I was in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which is the national French library. So it's like right at the edge of Paris. And there was not a lot of information on Central Asia, but so it made me want to research that because I felt like there needed to be more material. Through researching that, I was able to kind of, I think that the goal of any social scientist is to try to be a fortune teller, to try to be a clairvoyant. I think that should be the goal of a social scientist, to kind of take these measurements and different methodologies, find the appropriate ones, collect the data, analyze it, and see kind of, and then the clairvoyant kind of aspect comes with being able to predict the future, so to speak. And I think any scientist, really, natural scientists as well. So what I found was this kind of resistance to Westernization, and I felt that through my research that I had that I'd done about Central Asian states, such as Kyrgyzstan, such as Tajikistan, such as Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all of these countries that comprise Central Asia, although they are, they have their Muslim, many of them are Muslim, most of them I believe, identify as Muslim, and then they will drink vodka at their at their gatherings. You will not see that, like, in a Muslim country. You don't normally see people just drinking vodka, like even women wearing a headscarf, just throwing back shots of vodka. So I was seeing all of these elements of different cultural ideas in these new states that was actually to a point where it was a little bit worrying, because these states were also trying to build their identity. And I was able to infer that these states are high-risk states for violent extremism due to their resistance to Westernization, a fervent resistance to Westernization. I mean, we're talking about countries that think it's normal to kidnap your wife. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about that. And even the ones who claim that it's not actually kidnapping, they say, oh, it's a tradition and we planned it. Like that.
It's romantic.
It's romantic. No, this is, so with this kind of like, that region, that part of the world is just, there's so much going on. So there's a lot to really take in. And also to take into account that what is scarier than fake news is fake academia.
Oh yeah.
Fake books, fake data. You go into a library, you're reading a book, you think you are a nonfiction book, you think you are learning something, you think you have empirical evidence here in your hand, but it's actually propaganda, and it's actually a lie, and it's being presented as truth. So this is a huge issue in that part of the world, because people are being taught actual lies. So the people believe it, they become complacent, and we ask ourselves, why? How can this happen? How can this happen here? Well, it's because the people are being fed lies, and they are. It's very hard to not believe lies that are being fed to you regularly, so that's why I made that little comment when you said earlier that there's what you said exactly about Putin's past in the KGB
that we know of.
Yeah, that we know of, because we're not sure. We're not sure when fake academia happens. And I'm saying this at my alma mater, by the way, which I hope if any of my former professors are here, they're probably not, that they would agree with me on this. You have to take all this kind of, you have to take this kind of data, this kind of information, and you have to think critically. And I think that as being part of the free world, that we are able to think critically, and anybody can do it. You don't need a degree to really think critically and to quit the assumptions. Quit the assumptions, think critically, and you will find yourself in a situation, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, but you will find yourself in a situation where the information that you're taking in perhaps is useful because it's factual. A lot of the information that we receive when there's fake news or fake academia, that gets exported over here, all the way here across the pond in the US. Dan is in the UK, and you know, people watching from everywhere, which is great. But the reality of it is, when we are talking about countries that are at this level of corruption, the information coming out of those regions are going to be corrupted information and should be treated as such. It's kind of a guilty until proven innocent situation with that.
And this is something that ties into the Syrian situation, because
there's way too much corruption to take any chances with that. Yeah.
As someone who considers themselves quite left wing, I'm very sympathetic to the Kurdish movement in the region, but you know, I have some concerns, and it's very difficult to actually know what's really going on. You know, who knows exactly what's going on? It's an active war zone. Everyone's claiming all sorts of things. I think it's really important to actually talk to people who've been there, at least to get some on the ground perspectives. I mean, their perspectives might be as biased as anyone's, but at least you can hear from people who've seen with their own eyes what's going on.
Exactly, and that's so important. Especially the world's kind of getting smaller with the internet, and that is also what has really attracted me to Conatus as a platform, because it's actually truly nonpartisan. So to get these, one of the things that especially in like higher academia, people who get their master's degrees and their PhDs and things like that, when they do research, they're told that lived experience, or you know, that's kind of anecdotal evidence, it doesn't apply, you know, things like that. I think that is a little bit, that's kind of an indicator that there needs to be a little bit of reform in our education, because when we're talking about empirical evidence, so we are talking about things that were written by scholars, and maybe they were written by scholars who were living in closed societies. Maybe they were lying to make their society look good. Maybe they were lying to save their own asses. We need to keep these types of things in mind. So when people come out with lived experience, sometimes it's really worth listening to, and you will learn a lot. People like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, you will learn a lot from these people, and you have to kind of give that a chance. And so a nonpartisan platform, I think, is really kind of part of the future of kind of spreading information. And because it's kind of like a community of writers and editors, you know, we can fact check one another and things like that. And so these sorts of communities, I think, along with the various think tanks, I think really are the future for educating people. I'm not saying drop out of your universities, because actually being an academic was like one of the best parts of my life. I really enjoyed it. I don't regret it at all. I really enjoyed, you know, learning so many things from so many different perspectives. However, when the knowledge is endless, why not take into account these lived experiences? I really think it's very important not to sweep lived experience under the rug.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think this is the sort of the balance that we need, and and a balance that I hope we can achieve, is being able to hear from people, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, but hear them out and understand where they're coming from. You know, sometimes we get criticism on our articles. You know, people say, "Oh, how can Conatus News possibly believe this?" Or, you know, "Is this the line that Conatus News is pushing now?" Well, we're not really trying to push a line. So sometimes, most of the time, the articles that we publish are those we think are interesting perspectives that haven't really been heard very often. It's more important to hear from a variety of perspectives to us than to push any one line. And you know, this is the thing, is you can absolutely listen to someone, totally listen to them, understand them, and not agree with them. And I think this is really important because you know, sometimes people will put too much stock in lived experience, and they will say, "Look, I am telling you this. This is what I have experienced. So if you really listen to me, you would agree with me." And they'll say, "Listen to me. You're not listening to me because you're not agreeing with me." And I think it's really important to be able to listen to someone, totally actually listen to them, really understand their perspective. And you don't have to agree with them. It's so important to be able to do that.
Oh yeah.
To be able to entertain an idea without internalizing it is such an important skill. And that's part of our mission at Conatus News, is to explore various perspectives.
And also, it's great that that we have these different perspectives, truly nonpartisan, and being able to communicate with all sorts of people from all parts of the political spectrum, all sorts of beliefs and ideas, and being accepted for that. There were many times where I've written things or pitched things, and I was told that this is too much of a touchy topic during a sensitive time period. You can read my articles and you can take a guess why I was told that. But I really appreciated Conatus for truly sticking to that mission of being nonpartisan. Now, we don't have our dear Scott with us. We don't have our dear Scott with us. He is our resident centrist. And then I am kind of center right. And then Dan, you can...
I consider myself left wing.
Yeah. So, and we've all kind of been coordinating this. It's quite funny that I'm saying we've been coordinating this and we're happy all to be together, but Scott is not here, so it's like, did Scott just drop out?
He will be with us in the following weeks.
He will be he will be with us next time. But we just wanted to give you an introduction and an idea of what this podcast will look like, and perhaps introduce you to Conatus News if you're not already familiar, and be able to check out some of the excellent authors on there.
So the rise in authoritarianism, and I think we're seeing this around the world, and part of the reason for this is, I think, Western governments were so happy that other countries seemed to be opening up their markets. They thought this was a process of liberalization, that countries were adopting the neoliberal paradigm. And you see this with Russia, with Turkey, and recently with India, that you have these center-right governments coming in, and they're, as I say, they're opening up the markets. They're being very friendly to Western investment. And hey, it looks great. These guys are reformists. They want a sort of a moderate nationalism. Who can blame them for wanting to develop a sense of patriotism? And hey, they're opening up to the West. This is great. And what they did was they used their first terms to establish good relations with the West, to develop their economies, and in countries which don't have such great economies, getting that Western interest, getting that Western investment is great. If you can develop your economy, people will be really grateful. They'll be really happy, right? Because you'll be improving people's lives in tangible ways. But they used this as a way to establish their popularity, both in their own countries and abroad. And then they began to shift their tone. And again, you see this in Russia, in Turkey, in India. And they start introducing these kind of anti-Western nationalist elements to their policy and ramping it up bit by bit, cementing their power within their own countries. Sure, it turns the West against them, but at this point, they've already established their own reputations. They've already gained the trust of their own nation. So if things start to go a little badly for them, they start to get sanctions imposed on them, other countries start criticizing them. Well, now they're attacking our beloved leader who's brought us prosperity. Now these Western countries, which were so friendly to us before, they've turned against us. They wanted us to be their puppets, and now we're starting to make a name for themselves, and they're upset that they can't control us anymore. And
does this narrative sound very familiar?
It happens time and time again. I think it's all part of this arrogance of the establishment. I heard it so many times, and I'm sure that we all did, that Donald Trump was never going to be elected president of the United States, or that
a lot of people believed that.
The people of the UK.
I truly know somebody who left the country after that happened.
The people of the UK would never vote to leave the European Union, because what people value most of all is stability, and these kind of unstable, chaotic elements. Sure, they can gather a whole bunch of support, but not going to win the majority, because the majority is going to be sensible. They're going to go with the establishment. They don't want anything rocking the boat. And I think actually this is sort of things have almost been so stable, right? And then you have the financial crisis in 2008. And people start thinking, well, things have gotten worse, right? I think we've seen a steady incline in living standards across the world. There've been great strides in eliminating poverty all over the world. The fall of the Soviet Union, everything seems so much safer. And as soon as you have a sign of instability, the financial crisis, people start thinking, well, look, things have gotten worse. This establishment, they've made things worse for me. You say, well, okay, fine. Well, how much worse could things really be if we bring in someone who's going to buck the establishment? Of course, forgetting how much worse things could really be. And
a lot of this blame on I don't mean to cut you off, Dan,
sure,
but I think a lot of this blame on the establishment. But in the free world, we have so much power, individual power. I think that this collectivist thinking is making us kind of, even if we like, even if we refuse to acknowledge that we are, some of us are collectivists, even those who swear they can't stand collectivism, many of them are kind of falling victim to that in the in what I would refer to as the free world. And when I say that, I mean like an open society, a society that's not a closed society, or the developed world, whatever you would like to call it. But I think that we underestimate our own individual power. And if we were truly being blocked from our own individual power, I think that in the fashion of Western civilization, it would not roll. It would not fly. We would not let that happen. I truly do believe in our individualism, our individual ability to make things happen. And I think we're seeing that a little bit. We're seeing so many of these activists coming out, but some of them, what is their activism really about? So you were mentioning the anti-West sentiment in other countries, non-Western countries, but what about the anti-West sentiment that actually has kind of made its way here in Western countries? So in my last article, I kind of, I think I touched on it a little bit, but I did express, and I will continue to express my grievances with Muslim feminists, with the so-called Muslim feminists. Me as an ex-Muslim woman, I am out here advocating for these Muslim women who fall victim to honor violence and honor killings. Me as an ex-Muslim woman, I want nothing to do with that religion anymore. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to even, sometimes I get tired of talking about it. But I feel like I am one of the people who actually cares, will call it by its name, what it is. A lot of people are trying to say, well, when it happens in the West, people call it domestic violence. They don't call it honor violence. You're being racist by using these terms. You're being a bigot. No, you're not being a bigot. You're being factual. You are using the correct word. You are describing it as it is. There is nothing bigoted about it. If anything is bigoted, it's ignoring those girls, it's ignoring those lives, just because. And there was that one thing that it was just across the board. Each of these girls, of what they alleged, like so-called did wrong in their father's eyes, it was that they were becoming too westernized. It was a trend, like across the board. So, and then I don't see Muslim feminists coming out and condemning that. I see Muslim feminists blaming the West out of nowhere. It's like, where did you get that from? Why are we talking about that? That's so insulting and so terrible. And these girls, these poor girls, they become just kind of swept under the rug and forgotten about. So this anti-West sentiment, we have to remember ideas, the trade of ideas, it's real. It's basic, it's Econ 101, the trade of ideas. And I think we have allowed a lot of bad ideas into the West. And I'm all for free speech, but we need to think about who we are appointing to be our voices. So who are we appointing to be the voice for Muslim women who are facing persecution in the United States? We're appointing certain Muslim women who are not doing much for them, who don't care, who really don't care about them, and have kind of a different agenda, which is to slander the West. That's such an insult, because these girls, when I see these girls, I see friends, I see family members. When I look at these girls, when I read their stories, it really it gets to me after a while, and it makes me wonder. And it makes me wonder, why is it these particular folks who really don't have those girls' interests at all are in the places of power of activism and kind of the stars of activism, right? Whereas there are plenty of people out there who actually do care about human life, and they don't have a side agenda, which is completely anti-West and completely just that's their argument. That's their only argument.
Yeah.
Let's blame the West for everything.
So
That's not an argument.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm sorry. It's not an argument.
There are two things
ridiculous.
Here. Okay, so you've got a declining faith in institutions as a whole, which is one topic, and I'll touch on that a bit probably. I just want to come to this point about representation. I think that's really important. Something that I've written about briefly before, and it's something that I like to call, well, talking about it in Britain in particular, multiculturalism as practiced by the British state, right? Because the thing about representation, as you say, the question of who represents community, is who gets to choose who are the representatives. And a lot of the time there doesn't seem to be any kind of democratic process. It seems to be that people are chosen. And who are the people that tend to be chosen by, local councils of the government as a whole? It's people who are in high standing in the communities that they want to be represented. But who are the people in high standing? It tends to be the people with the most power in those communities. But if you really want to lift up, if you really want to empower the people in those communities, it's not the people who already have power in those communities that you want to lift up. It's the people in those communities who don't have any power. And this, in my view, and I don't want to be conspiratorial, but I don't think this is exactly a coincidence. If you look at the time period in which multicultural policies were originally brought in, the 60s and the 70s. This goes for Britain. I'm not sure about other countries, but remember, Britain was still an empire relatively recently in our history, right? And in ruling that empire, we used certain policies, and those policies were divide and rule, right? You saw in India, it was constantly divide and rule all the time. Group people into castes, group people into groups. You had light-skinned Indians and dark-skinned Indians being separated out. Of course, these divisions existed already. But it was a process of categorization and selective representation, which was designed to keep the communities fighting against each other, fighting for the favor of the British Crown. And we see these policies implemented shortly after the British Empire dissolved in our own cities, where we got minorities grouping together to demand better treatment by the British state. Keenan Malik describes it in one of his articles. I'm sorry, I don't remember the article. How you had the Black and Asian communities in Britain who were in the 60s totally united against racism discrimination by the British state. And so what did the British state do? Say, okay, we will, we haven't been listening to you guys, so what we'll do is we're going to listen. We'll have a representative from the Muslim community and a representative from the Sikh community.
Wow.
And what
one representative. I can almost guess what happened, but I want to hear it from you.
Blood on the streets, right?
Oh my God.
Blood on the streets. Black British people and Asian British people fighting each other.
Of course.
Literal fighting each other over who got what from the government, right?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. And that should be apparent to people right off the bat. That should be apparent to people. And unfortunately, it's not. It's not always apparent to people. They think, oh, well, Muslims are they're a marginalized people. You can believe that, you can not believe that. There are many ways to go about that statement. I believe that Muslims who want to be westernized and who want to integrate are the ones who are at risk, who are at the most risk, but they don't really get representation. Who's representing them? Nobody. Nobody. They come in, people who are like a marginalized group, they come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the lie is being taught that you can't be racist against white people. This is really sickening to me, because that in itself is so racist. When you say that, you are denying that there are people of color in power, who have the power, who are job creators, who are in a state of power, who are in an elevated state economically and socially and whatnot. So when you say that only white people can be racist, or you can't be racist against a white person because they benefit from white privilege, I invite you to go. Actually, I don't invite you because I don't want to go there, but I suggest to you to go to the Middle East, where everybody is brown and a lot of people are racist. So you can go there and see for yourself. And many of them have lots of money. So, and they're very successful. So these are some things that need to be taken into account. To say that you cannot be racist against a white person, really? No, that logic is saying that brown people, black people, whatever color people are not in positions of power. Maybe you could have made that argument like 50 years ago, or a little bit less. You could have made that argument a while back. We can't make that argument today.
So I'm actually, I'm going to write an article on this topic at some point. It's part of my series.
Wow. Nice.
And I actually agree with you. But it all comes down to definition. Yeah. And this is the problem is, and this is I think it's a big problem on the left at the moment, is what people on the left use the term racism is different from the common understanding, the ordinary person's understanding of racism. Right. And this is a problem because when you're not speaking, you're not using the same terms as other people, then you're talking cross purposes. And I think that the definition that the left is using is just, I mean, I understand where they're coming from, but it's racism equals privilege plus power, which is what they use to argue that you can't be racist unless you're in a position of power. But the ordinary person understands the term racism, and I think sort of rightly using this term. I think if you want to talk about privilege plus power, sure, use the term. But the thing about the term racism is it refers to an ideology. It's an ism, right? Right. Racism is an ideology which in which people are classed into races and then assigned values, properties, personalities, whatever, according to that race. So there are a lot of people out there who are prejudiced, a lot of people out there who are ignorant, but they will flatly deny being racist. In their own mind, right. They're not racist because they don't consciously have an ideology which separates people into races and assigns value to the races. They might subconsciously do that, but they don't ascribe to the ideology which they're being accused of holding. And this is a real problem. I think we really need to separate out ignorance, prejudice, ideology, and institution. Because if you can't do that, if you lump everybody together, then you can't overcome these obstacles. You can't, if you lump in someone like Richard Spencer, who is a white supremacist, in with, I don't know, some yob off the street who uses terms that I won't repeat, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not the same. The one might even support the other, but they're not the same. Because I think that they have different sources. Okay, so and yeah, going back to your point before I move on a bit, it is absolutely possible for people with minority positions to hold ideologies which are racist, which are supremacist. I like to refer to them as nationalist, whether they're actually a nation or not. It's all the same thing. It's you can call it a collectivist if you like. It's this in-group mentality. It's our group is being attacked. Anyone who is not a member of our group is an enemy. At best, they can be tolerated. This kind of supremacist ideology can be present in anyone. You can have
certainly, and and what it's leading to, what this sort of edgy sociology, allegedly sociology. I'm using this so loosely. Like I want to apologize to the sociology gods for even referring to this garbage as anything academic, as anything intellectual. What it is leading to is what we're seeing now on the internet of people who are, like, for example, there was a video, the news about it went viral. A bunch of kids were just beating the crap out of a white kid because the kid was white. Literally because the kid was white. Nothing else, just because the kid was white. And we're going to say that this kind of rhetoric is harmless and that this is the truth. And there are respected professors who are standing behind these theories. People are dying.
Yeah.
People are dying.
And this is the thing, is we on the left should not be wanting to lump everybody in as racist. Look, we should not be wanting to lump everybody in with the far right. If you want to win people over, if you want to win over, broad folks of people, you have to separate them ideologically from your enemies. You have to show them how they are different from the people that you consider to be, the bad guys, the enemies.
Right.
And I think part of the problem is that people on the left sort of consider almost the majority people in the West as enemies. They've almost sort of written off the general population. And this, of course, is a disastrous strategy. I understand the frustration. And I think part of it comes from, I believe that the system, the democratic systems that we live under, aren't constructed to be able to deliver the kind of things that people on the left want to see. So we talk about internationalism because I think this is part of the whole issue. Is there are obviously big disparities in wealth between the Western world and the rest of the world. And a lot of the focus on the left in the past 100 years has changed from within societies to between societies. The narrative that the West exploits the rest of the world. And I agree in a sense that we in the West sort of we concentrate wealth here, and it's a number of complicated systems as to how that happens. But if we want to distribute the wealth more evenly to the rest of the world, there is no mechanism which allows us to do that. You may argue, opening up the world to more free trade could distribute wealth more evenly. But of course, people on the left broadly don't believe that. When it comes to politics, the nation state, the very best that a nation state can do is look out for the interests of its citizens. Any organization, and this is the problem with all organizations, any organization, the best they can ever do is represent the interests of their members. Because the only ones who have a say over the direction of that organization is the people who constitute it. And so the only people that a nation state can really protect is the members of that nation state. So it's almost impossible to redistribute wealth from Western countries to the rest of the world. There's no mechanism to allow that to happen. I think that has caused part of the frustration on the left, is they feel like there is no way for them to peacefully implement change in this manner. And of course, when people feel like they can't peacefully implement change, they get frustrated, they get angry, and ultimately they get violent. And I'm not justifying the violence, but I'm trying to understand it. And I don't know exactly what the solution is there. But I think it's the strategy of perceiving the majority of the people in the West as enemies is incredibly self-destructive. I mean, you're just not going to get anywhere.
We agree on that. I also think for a long time, United States, yes, there was a racism problem, and it persists to this day. In the UK, I am sure I visited London very briefly, but I'm sure I've from reading news and whatnot, I'm sure there's there's racism there. I've experienced racism myself in France. I'm fluent in French. I walked into a coffee shop, and at the time I was I was just leaving Islam, so I didn't try pork yet. I actually tried pork, I think maybe like a year after that or something. I was like worried that I would get sick or something, I don't know. Anyway, I walk into a coffee shop, and the guy who owns the coffee shop, I sit down, I look around, I see there's all types of people, some American tourists and some French people, and some locals, some tourists, whatever, what have you. And then when I sat down, the waiter, he looked at me and he said, "Do you eat pork? You look like somebody who doesn't eat pork." That's what he said to me. And I said, "I don't eat pork." And he said, "We have nothing on the menu for you." So I said, "Do you have coffee?" He said, "Yes." "Is there pork in the coffee?" "No." So I ordered a coffee, and I sipped it, and I just stared that motherfucker down. And that's the whole damn time. And you know what? Like, these are small instances of people being bigoted or racist, or it was kind of an attempt. I could tell it was a tacit attempt for me to leave, but it doesn't make me hate France. I love France so much. Ask anybody. I'm really obsessed with France. It's the reason why I studied French so hard. I lived in France. I adore it, and I adore the culture. there's a word for it apparently, a Francophile. I'm a Francophile. Anyway, so yeah, that happened. Doesn't make me hate France, doesn't make me angry. I don't want to hit anybody. I just, I ordered a coffee and I was just gave him a stern look while I'm drinking the coffee, just being snarky Sara, age 19. And that was me. And that's how I dealt with it. There's no denying that there is a racism problem. The way we're going about it is the problem. That in itself is the problem. Because the racism problem, it's like this: it's shrinking. That's how it was over decades. It was shrinking until we had some of these crazy sociologists, and unfortunately, they're highly respected somehow, and they are teaching a very, very, very dangerous narrative. And I believe that it's a false narrative, because now we had a racism problem and it was shrinking, and then now it's exploding and it's becoming a thing, and nobody's safe. No one is safe. Like, if anybody believes that a little kid deserves to be beaten up, and it's put on Facebook Live and beaten up for being white, and no one feels like that's a racist and terrible thing and gut-wrenching, that's sickness. These are people who are spreading sickness. Yeah. There's nothing not racist about that. I'm sorry. I can't honor that sort of argument. And so I'm glad we're kind of on the same page when it comes to that. I think that this is an issue that the issue of race has kind of arisen again. It's come back from the dead. And it's come back with a vengeance too. And I think that people who are maybe too polarized on the political spectrum, they're not quite sure what to do about it. Yeah. So we need those nuanced minds, and we need them to have pride in their in going to class. A diploma is not just a piece of paper. I remember when I got my undergraduate diploma and I said, "Oh, that work," and they gave me just a piece of paper. I was so sad. Okay. And then when I went and I pursued my master's degree, because since I was a little girl, I always said, I'm going to get at least my master's degree. And I went and I pursued it, and I really fell in love. I fell in love with learning, and learning how to be more of a producer of knowledge rather than just a consumer of somebody else's theories, but being more of a producer, and then being an actual producer when you get into PhD program, which for me is down the line. But so I really encourage people to do that. People are starting to say universities are useless. They're useless. I don't want to go to university. I'm not going to waste money on university. They're teaching nonsense. They're teaching garbage. Well, they're teaching nonsense and garbage, so you need to get out there and become an academic if you can. Become a professor and start teaching the new generation the way you believe that they should be taught, instead of just complaining while being complacent. Go do something.
and this is the thing, like, the way that I always see it is, you can't let yourself feel entitled to have other people believe certain things. And yes, we should live in a world where there is no racism, where there's no prejudice, and so on, right? We should live in that world, but we don't. So in order to get to that world, we have to do something, right? We cannot simply expect that world to come into existence.
Right.
If people aren't giving us the respect we deserve, how do we go about obtaining that respect? Well, we don't go about it by just saying, well, they should be giving me the respect I deserve. Okay, sure, they should be, but they're not. So what are we going to do? So this rise of populism, of nationalism and so on, is inherently a failure of all of the other ideologies if they're losing ground. You can bemoan it, you can complain it, but you have to actually tackle it, and that means doing things differently. It means figuring out what you're doing wrong, figuring out why these people are being won over and win them back.
We can't, try to live in this kind of utopia. We have to be cognizant of the world that we live in and not live in La La Land. Yeah. We have to be here now, informed, go out, go vote, do that, be an activist as well, and keep it real. If you see something you don't like, for example, there were a lot of people who were upset with the Women's March. A lot of people were upset with the Women's March. They didn't like some of the organizers at the Women's March. Then you write to them. You write to them. You tell them who you want to see, who you think is a proponent of women's rights. You write to them. You be proactive. If you are proactive, then you're on the right track. You're on the right track. But to live in La La Land and this utopia that just stays in your head, it's just going to stay here. Yeah. It's not going to go anywhere. Nothing's going to happen. And I think that a lot of times we underestimate our power to be. Anybody can be an activist, and it's very easy in this day and age. I mean, one of my dreams was to be a published, when I was a kid, to be a published author and to write in a way that conveys my activist spirit that's within me. And I did that. And it was not that hard. It was not that hard. If you have to inform yourself. One, stay informed. Two, you have to then execute. You inform yourself, and have a plan based around that, and then execute it. And exactly. I think a lot of people are complacent in just living in La La Land, and that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, I think we'll
never see what we want to see.
Yeah, I think we've got the bystander effect. I think our societies are so huge, everyone thinks, and this ties into the sort of the end of history thing. Everyone thinks everything's already been thought of. Someone's going to be out there doing it. I don't need to do anything. Someone else is going to solve it. And of course, if everyone thinks that, nothing gets done. And this is something that motivates me as well. Look, you have to act as if you're the only one, as if you're the only one saying the things that you're saying.
Right. That's why they teach kids when there's an emergency, don't yell, call the police. Point at somebody in their face and say, you call the police. Watch them pull out their phone. I remember that's what they used to teach us, because they said, like, psychologically, everyone else is going to think, oh, someone's going to call the police. No, you point at somebody and you call the police. This is kind of what we need.
And I think
we want you to be an activist.
On that note, we should end it there. I think that's a great point to end.
Yes, I think we did well. I think we got our point across.
Going forward, we'll be recording these live. And we're going to find some way for subscribers, donators in some capacity to watch these live. We're going to have edited videos going up on YouTube. I'll be looking into other mediums such as SoundCloud to put out audio versions. If you're interested in seeing more of these, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like. Do leave comments if there's any feedback you'd like to give, whether you prefer shorter episodes, longer episodes. I'm not sure how much longer we can go on for, but do let us know. And yeah, if you have any thoughts on the things that we've discussed today, do feel free to chime in. This has been me, Dan Fisher.
And Sara Iraqiya.
Thank you very much. Been good to talk, and I'll see you all next week.
Y'all next week.